Kenaskumtno, Minaximanto kasawim goao, Minananaskumog, Ganyoptogi suog, Minakigawi noaski. I want to thank the Creator in the four directions and our Mother Earth, and I want to thank all the elders. I've been so graciously hosted here. I am just amazed by the kindness that have been demonstrated to me, and I'll certainly take that kindness back to my people. I will be sharing a lot of what I've learned coming here to my people, especially my parents. We are being live streamed on our Idle No More site, so there's approximately 150,000 people that are on that site. So I want to say hello to the Idle No More supporters, and I want to shake hands with each and every one of you. My presentation today will talk about freedom in the time of climate change. These are the lands of my people. This is a portion of it. I come from Atikamekw Sagaikon and Bata Sagaikon. My mother's lands are there pictured. That was our lake. I was standing on it the day I left to come here. It's frozen. And that's the same lake in the summertime in May, June, and July. So I come from extreme weather, and I love it. I love my people's lands. Of course, we've been colonized. John Cabot was the one that put his sword down, and the presumed sovereignty of the British Crown crystallized, as they say in law, in their law. And then the domination and dehumanization began. And I want to thank Stephen Newcomb for those words. And then the numbered treaties, if you go in and Google them, they're there. I am from the Treaty 6 lands, as was stated. And then the Indian Act became enforced, and that continued another layer of oppression. And then the colonial legislations, which I'll talk about a little bit. I'm going to sound a little bit like an auctioneer, so you got to follow me. I hope I don't overwhelm you. There's way too many legislations to list here. Just know they're there. Indigenous resistance has existed ever since we've had contact with the colonizer. And we've been imprisoned a long time, almost 100 years in the pass and permit system. As soon as we were out of there, we sued and have been sued, and we've resisted time and time again, over and over again. I won't go into the history of the resistance, but this is the numbered treaties from treaties 1 to 11. This is where I'm located, in between Saskatchewan and Alberta. These are the Alberta tar sands. I will, if you could go in and research that on your own, this is incredibly important. They not only impact my people, but they also impact the world. I'm going to show you images of it because it's important that I talk about it, mention it. These are some of the images from the Alberta tar sands. This is a massive scale, massive. It surpasses the size of the state of Florida. The reason why I'm mentioning it, because these tar sands are 2.5 hours northwest of where I live. There's animals coming out of those lands that have cancer. We can no longer hunt there. It's incredibly damaging. It's one of the largest contributors to climate change, toxic emissions coming out of there. My relatives who live on those lands or nearby there are absolutely impacted. It's so devastating. The process of extracting oil and gas needs fresh water. Bill C-45, which triggered Idle No More, remove the protection of our water. Bill C-45, although Idle No More happened, is still colonial law. Bill C-45. I don't think the colonial state expected really anyone to read that, but there was more than a few of us that actually went in and read it. It was a convoluted, massive bill that hid certain changes to the system, and one of them was that it removed the protection of water. So we stood up. The first Idle No More teach-in happened on November 10, 2012. And honestly, we hoped to reach people, but we didn't expect it to go all over the world. It went to Montreal, Edmonton, Toronto, Whistler, James Bay to Ottawa, Ottawapiskat, Cape Breton, Windsor, Vancouver, Victoria, Ottawa, Lethbridge, and the young people stood up. That's what made it so amazing. It went international, here, across the Americas, overseas, by Twitter. And these are our demands. If you go into our website, Idle No More, you'll see them, but I want to focus on number 6. Actively resist violence against women and hold a national inquiry. That national inquiry has yet to happen, but we're hopeful. They've gathered a certain group of people, and they're saying there's going to be a national inquiry, but that should only be one of the ways to deal with the violence against women. The violence against women is connected to violence on land. Colonization, again, is about domination and dehumanization of brown and black bodies. Men are exalted in colonial systems. Women become gatekeepers. The systems need to be disrupted and abolished. And this is where I'm hearing other people say, the other keynotes in the workshops, that we need to replace it with our systems, but these systems have to be decolonized. They have to be decolonized, otherwise we're going to recycle the patriarchy and the misogyny and all those other systems that are so problematic. This is where my story begins. The other ladies have their story. There's Jessica Gordon, Nina Wilson, Sheila McLean, and myself. But this is my story. I was researching, and I came to the chapter of my book that talked about land, and I had all these fuzzy memories because I've been away a long time going into the colonizers' education system. And when I went home, I was astounded at the devastation of the deforestation of my people's lands without our consent, and certainly not our free, prior, and informed consultation or consent. And we never ceded and surrendered these lands. These are the clear cutting. They call it clear cutting, but it really is deforestation. It's devastating. It changes the landscape. I will not see these lands come back in my lifetime, perhaps in my grandchildren's. But the way they go and take the trees, it changes the whole land and also the flow of the water. Our lands are being plundered and pillaged. There's treaty violations, a long history of genocide and ethnocide that continues today. Deforestation now exceeds the Amazon, and a lot of people don't know that. This is the boreal forest. It's beautiful, beautiful. These are the lands that I grew up in and ran around like the little savage that I love being. And I ran around these forests. And this is what they look like today. All the trees are gone. And, my dad grew up there. My grandfather had a shelter out there, a cabin. Saskatchewan Environment, or DNR, Department of Natural Resources, as it was known at the time, went around burning down our shelters because they wanted to exert their domination. And then we told my dad, they came for the trees, don't go there, Dad. And my dad said, that one day he said, I want to see it. So he did. That's him. Sorry, I have a little bit of cold, so I gotta drink some water. So he was pretty devastated. That's where my grandfather's shelter was. We have burial sites out there. The usual colonial story where they came with disease-infested blankets, nearly wiped out my whole, all of my people. There's graves out there. There's about 1,000 of them. And I look after them now with my brother, and we go in there, we take care of the graves and everything with my family. And this is part of the dehumanization and the domination. We were starting to build a shelter out there by the grave sites, and they came and gave a notice for us to get out. And so, of course, I'm not going to. I want to leave you with some good news, because I don't want you thinking it was all very horrible. So while they came for the trees, even all hours of the night, they're driving in there and hauling out our trees. My nephew and I, my brother, we stayed out there, and if you know anything about our lands, there's like timber wolves that are timber wolves, like if I'm standing, the timber wolf will stand about to my shoulder. And the smaller wolves will stand just above my hip here. And there's cougars, and there's also bears. So it's not an easy thing to tell people that I'm out on the land. I'm food out there. I'm part of the food chain. So where I put the sign there, that road leads to our hunting lands. I want to tell you that our lands are massive. Like my family hunting land is 2 days walk in each direction. That's how large our hunting land is. And where we live, it's on a different location. And that's where my ancestors are buried. And this is our hunting land. And that road leading up there, we drive up there. There's all kinds of roads. That's not the only road. So it was more like a symbolic blockade. I shut that road down, put boards across it, and I put this sign there, and we were there all summer. My nephew and I, we lived out there. And that's that little creek. And we weren't going to let them take the trees. And I told my mom, I said to her in the language, of course, I said, Mom, even if I have to put my body across the road, I'm going to do it. And my mom says, well, you only cover a quarter of the road. I just looked at my mom like, oh, Mom, you just killed the drama. And so then one day, we were running out of supplies, my nephew and I said, we got to go get food, like fresh water and all these different things. So we drove out, came out of that road on that picture where it says no trespassing. We came out of there, and we drove to my mom and dad's. We were going to visit them, and it took a couple of hours, maybe about 3 or 4 hours. When we came back, we started driving up there. My nephew and I are laughing, and we're just like enjoying ourselves. And we pull up, and we just came to a complete stop. We both sat there quietly. We noticed someone had shot up my signage. And the guns used out there are lethal. They're lethal guns. They're meant to kill large animals. And the bullets that you see on that signage are from a high-powered rifle. That's a death threat. And there was other things that happened after that. So we were very aware of that. And then my nephew and I, we didn't sleep there that night. However, we did go back the following nights, but we were very aware of that we were being watched. And there was other stuff that happened every time we left our shelter. So we knew that we were being monitored. So shortly after that, the forestry people that were taking our trees came and seen me. They drove up and they came and seen me and they said, we came looking for you. And I said, okay, so what's happening? And they told me, we're done. We're not going to take the trees here. So we did manage to save a tiny portion of the forest, and that's where the animals seem to have converged, which is a little complicated. And then that's another part of it. It's beautiful. We built a little bridge there for my mom because she wanted to go across the little creek to the berries that she was competing with the bear. But she would walk across and go pick the berries from there. And so we did manage to save a small portion of the forest. I want to share what the Margulies Prize was about. I don't like to just talk. I am very, very action-oriented, I think. I like to think I am. I like to do things. So I ran for chief on my very misogynistic, patriarchal reserve. And so I was very impacted by colonization in the Indian Act. And I knew I wasn't going to get in, but I wanted to disrupt the colonial systems. Just to give you an idea, sometimes I'll go to very white spaces and go sit there and walk around just to disrupt the just to disrupt the coloring. So I am not a politician by any stretch of the imagination, but I remember watching on TV politicians go door to door. So I thought I'll go door to door. And wow, I shouldn't have done that. But anyway, I did have a huge learning experience, it's just amazing. I went to knock on this door and I thought it was a chicken coop. But I did see a vehicle parked there. And I went and knocked on the door and someone called and said, come in, but in a language, right? Bihtagui. And I went in and here was a gentleman living there. And this is part of the dehumanization of indigenous people, right? Even the basic right of shelter. It looked like he dug a hole on the ground and put some boards together. It was unbelievable. And I asked him, how long have you lived here? And he said, 16 years. Yeah, it was horrible. And so I told him, even if I don't get in for chief, I'll try and do something. And of course I didn't get in. But I work with an amazing group of people, and I told them we can't leave him. It's a pastahoin in my people's laws. We can't leave someone like that. So we started fundraising, and we managed to fundraise $35,000, and we called the campaign One House, Many Nations, and we built him a home, a mini home. And if you know our winters, it easily drops to -52 with the wind chill. I give this as an example to people. It's so cold on some days that when you spit, your spit freezes before it hits the ground. That's how cold it can get. So it was incredibly important that we get shelter for him. So there it is. It was a mini home. And he has a home, like that wood stove there. It can generate electricity. It's totally off the grid. It has a composting toilet, shower, all the necessities that he needs. Self-care. And I liked what Annette Sykes said yesterday. You can't sit on the fence. Just being born Indigenous is political. Freedom in a time of climate change is even more critical, even more important. If you're complacent and if you're silent, that's considered consent. Prayers, smudge, lodges of my people, the lands, those are absolutely what save me every day. Every day. Prayers, smudging. I go into the lodges of my people. I was raised in there. I don't know anything about the church. I was raised in the lodges of my people, immersed in the language. Research demands that we go and research towards our freedom, liberation, and self-determination. It's either freedom or die. We will die. Bill C-45, it still went through, and it's still colonial law. Other bills are being introduced. Bill C-51, activism may equal economic terrorism now. So I do my best not to refer to myself as an activist or an environmentalist. I am a land defender. I am a nihio. I am a family to my nation. What can you do? Plastic. Plastic is the worst product. Recycle it. Don't use it. I tell my people, and I'm saying it again on the live stream, our ceremonies are going to start, and we like giveaways. We like to give away gifts, and the biggest gift that we give is plastic. And I'm telling people, don't give plastic. Plastic is a byproduct of oil and gas. Care about what is happening. We all impact each other. When you need us to make a stand on that offshore drilling that's coming, we all need each other. You're going to need a global voice. Land is everything. Our history is written in the lands and the waters. I know that the colonizer likes to say that we do not have a written language. I say we do. It's written in the pictographs, in the markings. That's our history. And it's written on the stones, in the waters, on the land. Be informed, not just through mainstream media. I've learned very quickly that mainstream media can be very brutal. I'm surprised at this point that no one has written a research paper on how we were so brutally attacked constantly. You should see the death threats that we were getting the first year, and every once in a while still through Idle No More. And we were attacked very forcefully by men, and I'm saddened by that. I'm really sad about that, because I have 2 sons, and I hope that the next time, or our ongoing resistance and revolution, the men will step back and prevent other men from attacking. You just go and research Idle No More the first year, and you'll see it even in Twitter. I had to block some pretty prominent men in many of the sites because they were pretty horrible. But then when you look at the process of colonization, that's part of that. It's the grooming of those systems that exalt patriarchy and misogyny in there. And then the women followed after that, which made it even more difficult. How can you support Idle No More? Don't be silent. Don't be silent. That's the worst thing you could do. Your silence is considered consent. It's called acquiesce in their common law. Vote, but hear your leadership. When I say vote, I'm talking about the colonizer. I believe that when we go to vote in their systems, we legitimize and entrench a very fictional system based on a myth called the doctrine of domination. Use alternative energy, which is why we built that mini home. It's on solar and it's on alternative energy. Join Idle No More rallies or other events. We all need to support each other. You can call your event Chicken Little. As long as you protect the land and the water, I will show up. I will do my best to show up. Be prayerful and peaceful. Unless you have to put your body across the road. And then there's our website, idlenomore.ca. Thank you. I also wanted to hold on, sorry. I have 3 minutes. I have a gift for the institution. It was beaded by my daughter, and I want to leave it here. And it's an Idle No More medallion. So I will leave it to Leonie, and she will put it where she thinks it's fit. Okay, thank you. Oh, there she is.
Tihei mauri ora. Mauri ora kia tātou, I roto I tia tāhuatanga o tēnei kaupapa o tātou, te mana motu hake, hioi ki ngā tipuna I konei. Nā koutou tēnei taonga I tuku iho mai kia mātou hei aha, hei oranga ma mātou o uri whakaheke, o koutou whawhai e kore e warewaritia. Hua I rātou kia rātou, tātou kia tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ki ngā whenua o te rohe nei, ngā maunga, ngā awa, ngā hitori o kōrero, me ngā mana I manaaki mai nei I mātou I tēnei wā, tēnā koutou. I wish to acknowledge firstly all the ancestors that are here with us, from them who we inherit our mana motuhake, and to acknowledge also their struggles so that we might continue to survive and thrive today. I also wish to acknowledge all those who have become ancestors before their time because of their sacrifice and fight for our rights. And my love goes out to all our communities who are still struggling and sacrificing to defend what is sacred to us. Taku aroha nui kia koutou, kia tātou. So to the lands that we stand on today, its histories and stories, the Waikato Tainui peoples and Ngāti Wairere, who are hosting our group Te Atakura out at Hukanui Marae. It is an honour to be here and to be re-immersed in the knowledges of this place, such as he manawa whenua e kore e me miti. And I am always in awe of the guidance that can be found in our lands wherever we go. And so my thanks goes to you, Leonie, for inviting me to come to this rohe and to speak at this hui. Kia koutou hoki ngā manuhiri tuarangi. I know my haere mai ki Aotearoa to our international visitors who've come from afar. It was an honour for our group Te Atakura to host Sylvia back home last week, especially a privilege for me to have her back home up the coast. As a founder of Idle No More, the idea was for Sylvia to connect with our grassroots people, those that are fighting the offshore oil exploration and the pollution of our lands. But we also had Sylvia wowing our primary school babies with stories of cougars and bears and frozen lakes, and they were really, really amazed and impressed. And of course, following that, she met up with their older siblings, their aunties and uncles, and us, the teachers, to share with us the stories of Turtle Island. So this is actually a taonga that Sylvia gifted to me from her mother. And so there's a few of us here today from Tia Tukura Sylvia, who are all wearing our taonga, as a sign of our appreciation for you having come to our land. So, tēnā koe, ka nui te aroha ki a koe. Hioi, a tātou, ko Hukurangi te maunga, ko Waipū te awa, ko Nukutai memeha te waka, ko te papatipu o Uepohatu te whenua, ko Ngāti Porou te iwi. So I'm from Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Uepohatu people. Our lands, which we took Sylvia to, lay under the shelter of our Hukurangi maunga and our river Waipu. And we speak of our tipuna Māui, not to be confused with Disney's Māui, or the misrepresentation that is in Disney's Māui, but for us, the Māui whose cleverness and tenacity led to positive transformations for our people. I just also need to mention that I'm also grateful to the people of my partner, James Porter Tiatiawa, on the west coast of this island, who is also Professor Pihama's people. And the fact that I've personally brought 2 more Tiatiawa children into the world and have another one on the way, I'm sure is one of the reasons why I'm standing here today. So, kia ora to that, Leonie. Mana motuhake. To all those in the room that are engaged in educating about Indigenous laws, Indigenous practices, values and systems, ways of thinking, ways of being, to me there is no surer way to our path of mana motuhake. And to the many tohunga who are in the room who do that work, you know, my thanks to you for everything that you contribute to who we are. My own area of research, which I'm talking about today, is really about the teaching of mana motuhake. So teaching and learning about Indigenous rights, about Indigenous politics, colonisation, our resistance, and how to best go about that and survive. Knowing that that moment, that educational moment, might also be the beginning of a huge research journey for others. And one of the things that Sylvia just talked about that really resonated with me was that need to karakia, that need to smudge, that need to self-care, that need to prepare. And when I began as a lecturer in politics and policy, I was just so happy to have the role. I was so wrapped and excited that I didn't even question really whether or not I was prepared for it or could do it. A few years before lecturing, I had taken my new and shiny undergraduate degree in policy down to government buildings to work as a policy analyst, a policy activist, I told myself, but policy activist, and it wasn't long before I realised I had made a huge mistake. That simply we didn't have enough critical mass to make any significant changes when in one foul, racist, anti-Māori speech swoop, millions of dollars could be cut from our initiatives despite the years of work from the people that had been in there or any protest on our part. And so, although I must say it was great and satisfying work leaving government and going to join our unions, to work with people like Helen Potter and Lee Cooper, that was a lot of fun. When I was offered a lecturing job, it was with a huge sense of relief because I felt that I would be training that next wave of policy analysts, policy activists that could form a critical mass. And so at no point really did I question whether or not I was prepared for the work. And then 2 things happened that brought to my attention that maybe I perhaps wasn't quite prepared. The first thing was I was talking on the phone to one of my mentors. It was about a treaty class. Something had happened where my non-Māori students were stubbornly not getting something, and I was venting my frustrations anyway. And anyway, this mentor said to me, "Now, Veronica, this word settler, I don't use this word anymore. And for any of you that know Moana Jackson, he is so quietly spoken that it takes a minute or 2 to realise that you're getting a growling." And so, but it was a really important moment for my really chirpy late 20-something self to perhaps stop for a minute and actually consider what it is that I knew about this role. The second thing that happened, just briefly, was with another Māori student in my politics class. And we had just finished a 2-day course, or a 2-day wānanga. We're having our whakawātea, or our reflection and clearing time. And what happened is that this woman, she stood up and she shared that she had been adopted by Pākehā parents, by white parents, and that they had tried to protect her. They had tried to protect her from the racism that they knew that she would experience, but of course they couldn't. And that her whole life, right from being a Māori child growing up in a Pākehā community, was that she had thought that she'd had depression since she was a child, but she now knew that it wasn't that. It's that she was Māori. In my heart, I remember the day was so broken for her, but that's also when I realised I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was getting to, because I'm not a social worker, I'm not a counsellor. As said, I was trained as a policy analyst, and I wasn't trained to help people, let alone myself, deal with what I was then asking them to learn mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And anyone who does this type of work will have these same stories. You'll have these same stories of the huge pain and journey that students go through. And for us, for Te Atakura, it was a huge concern because while we had formed as a student group in 2000 at Massey University to battle the racism and ignorance that we found on campus, about 10 years later, funnily enough, we hadn't really gone into our professions that we had been there to train for, but we had all become educators and we were all facing that same thing. And it really was that we were worried about being irresponsible in terms of taking people through this painful journey with no plan, no path, just there you go, there's the information of everything that's happened to us. And then what? So what I did is I rang Miriana Pittman. And for anyone that knows Miriana, she has this really uncanny way of saying exactly what you need to feel better, and then prodding and probing you with questions to force you to think about, so what are you going to do about it now? And so what we of Te Atakura did is that we run 3 different initiatives. Just briefly, as one is that we go to the place where our treaty was signed every year. We go there to be able to listen to the people and the debates who are there, and we take as many students and staff as we can with us. The second thing that we do is that we hold Tiriti educator training, where we invite other young educators like us to come along to be trained beside us, with us, by our mentors. And so we've had, our first training was held by Mona Jackson, another few later was run by Miriana, and Ani Makaere, this is your warning that Miriana has volunteered you for the next one. So the third initiative is what Leonie has asked I share just a little bit about with you today, and that is the formal interviewing then of people like Moana and Miriana as to their work. And you know how when you're an academic you're meant to do a PhD? Well, I had never ever considered doing one, but when I realised I had to do one, I wanted to do it on the coolest thing I could think possible, the most amazing thing I could do. And of course, for me, that was the training that we were already receiving from these 2 pakeke. So I was grateful when Moana and Miriana, what they did is that they gave their blessing for this to become a more formal project. But what they also said is that I had to also reach out to some of their friends and colleagues who had shared their battle and could shine a light on how to best do this work as well. So I ended up interviewing 24 of our idols. No more Veronica, my supervisor said, 24. I was really fortunate to be given a Ngā Pai o Te Maramatanga scholarship, Ngā Mihi Kia Koutou in Fulbright, New Zealand, to be able to connect with some of our Indigenous political educators overseas. And my great thanks go to those who supported me, Papa Rudi Reza of the Cowlitz people, Auntie Ku Kakalau from Hawaii, and Mick Dodson from Australia, who supported me while I was overseas. Now, I don't have time to tell you about all these people. I could spend the rest of the conference talking about them, but I'm sure that you recognise some of them. So I went to them and basically said, so how do you do it? How do you do this work and survive? How do you best honour the journey that students are going through? What do we do about things like when they get emotional? What do they do about things when there's anger? All the questions that we as young political educators in Te Atakura didn't have answers for. So you want to know what they said? Yeah? Right, you other young indigeneity political educators, decolonisation workers, those like us Te Atagura who are trying to, those of you who are trying to find your way. This isn't everything that they said. Obviously I have hours and hours of really amazing interview material with them. But just here are some of the things that I found particularly significant to me as a new educator. So really grouped around the areas of, praxis first, that reflection and action in terms of really thinking deeply about ourselves as educators. What might then be some pedagogy approaches to this work, and then also curricula. If we only have so much time, what are the very specific curricula? So things to reflect upon and note in our work as young educators. The first one is really that you may not have envisaged yourself as the educator. Okay, you might have never ever thought that that's what you're going to do, but please don't let that stop you. And so our first pakeke there, which is Koro Mason, Emeritus Professor Sir Mason Jury, but who we know as Koro Mason. He says, this is a quote from him, "I was on the Royal Commission on Social Policy, which took me into a broader area than the medical area, but I was quite sure that I'd go back to psychiatry when that finished. What I hadn't anticipated was a delegation turning up on my front door asking me to consider coming to Massey. My thoughts initially were not to do that, because I didn't see myself as an educator at all, but then they sent round a group of kaumātua. A group of elders. So that was that. The second thing that I wanted to discuss and connect with you other young political educators is that I know some of us get really nervous about sharing our own analysis, and that we stress out a lot about knowing the words of our tohunga and these more esteemed ones, but know that when I interviewed them, they really, really encouraged to keep pushing the boundaries and that this is welcomed. And so Whaia Ani Makaere, whose analysis I must say most people are fairly intimidated by, it's so sharp and fierce and bright, she said to me that she hopes in 20 years that people will look back at what she's done and go, oh gosh, is that all she could hope for? And that we might be amused by how timid her desires were. And so we have a responsibility to keep on pushing in our thinking, and actually an expectation from those ones that we will do so. Another point to make is that it's okay to be an educator. So I know that I've sat in my office lots of times with my heart almost bursting with frustration at the fact that I was in the office. And but know that it is a valid contribution. Papa Gary Foley from Australia, who you might know there, he said that his work now as a lecturer at a university is teaching at all, it's just the latest strategy of my life in politics. It's still about changing the world. Maybe a little bit less crazy than when he was a 17-year-old, he says. Maybe. But what Leonie says, though, is that as part of that, we must be creative, strategically creative in what we are doing. And so one of the things she says is making a short documentary is a better way to do it, depending on the audience. Workshop training, research training, that the kaupapa is no different. It's all about transforming our experiences, but that we must get creative and fluid with what we have. And this is where as well, just Papa Ranginui, when I talked to him, he really stressed to me, knowing our privilege as educators and the huge resources that we have at our disposal. And that simply he would absolutely push the boundaries because he said he couldn't be sacked, he thought. He said, absolutely, I had tenure, so I could speak truth to power. And so one of the things us as young educators need to consider is that we are doing no favours by not pushing the boundaries with our students. All our people who are out there and suffer, the opportunities that we have to actually change the hearts and minds of people that will then be in contact with our whānau, what are we doing about it? So it's just briefly some of the findings from Praxis. Again, with pedagogy, so just some of the things for us to think about in terms of our beliefs and approach to teaching and learning. One thing is that often what we find amongst our group is that we're really careful with our language because we're afraid of offending people, upsetting students and not knowing what to do when we upset them. And Auntie Ku Kahakalau, she says, if some of your ancestors just happen to have been the people who did whatever it is that they did, I'm not all of a sudden going to act like they weren't part of it, that it was some other white guys over here, not your ancestors. The reality is the truth. You know, so again, I feel as Māori, I'm not sure if it's part of a sense of manaakitanga, is that we feel that we can't speak directly, but we, you know, just need to ask whose benefit is it for, and honing those skills about being able to talk truth to reality in terms of that mix. Next thing as well that was really important from Whae Miriana is that emotions are not a negative element should they occur in our classrooms. And the thing that she had said to me is great revolution is born out of great pain. Great change is born out of great pain, the collective experience of pain, and that great revolution is born out of great beauty as well. And she said if you talk to any of the language activists, they will say it is the love of the language. It's not just the sadness that it was taken away that makes them work. So emotions are necessary, same with pātakawai there. You know, that if we can fall in love with who we are, then that can be a key change in terms of our teaching and learning. Following on from that, I just wanted to note that I know in a lot of our policy and politics work here in Aotearoa, I'm not sure about overseas, but we have a really negative focus on disparity, and all the inequalities that we're facing. And Karina Walters said something to me in her interview which just stopped me in our tracks, and it was our identity comes from our original instructions. It doesn't come from being oppressed. It doesn't come from how a coloniser defines us. If we begin to think about our identity as defined only by our oppression and our colonisation, we will cease to exist because then we become defined by being unhealthy, by being unwell, by having health disparities. And we've got to flip that discourse, she says, in teaching, with materials, with our resources. We've got to flip that discourse, flip the script and say, no, that is a social reality we have to deal with and overcome and heal from. But our original instructions is what identifies us because that is who we are. So a huge learning there, I know, for us in politics, at least in Aotearoa. The last thing, a part of that as well, is that Whae Annette, who heard speak yesterday, you know, she says that as a part of that, remembering who we are, is that we must challenge and have that somehow as a part of our teaching and learning. Because she's concerned we've forgotten how to dream dreams and to envision those dreams. But to also explore the ways that we can give mechanical implementation to those dreams. So she says, you know, we've got to find exercises that students can do to think beyond what is and to know that they have the power, you know, to create. So just some examples from pedagogy there. Right. Curricula. So this is in terms of the content. If you are thinking about the content of your teaching, I certainly know that in Aotearoa, there's a tendency to focus on the Pākehā political structures, on the white political structures in the systems, parliament, voting, politics, and politics departments all across universities, even with Māori in there, this is the focus on things like voting. But we need to core ourselves in Indigenous knowledges held within Indigenous languages. And one thing that I loved from Korohuirangi, Waikirepuru, is that when he spoke to me about Parihaka, he said out of all that confusion and disaster has been the overall impact of enlightenment, mau ngā rongo ki te whenua, whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata, peace on earth, goodwill to mankind, and that there was a time when they, of the people of Parihaka, were not allowed to plough their own lands. They defied that, and the kōrero taranaki tūkau praukau, stand firm, plough your land, we can take that with us any time. I love that. We can take that with us any time in all the work that we do. So in that, there is a challenge for us to know our own world and to continually deepen ourselves on that world. And then perhaps, I know for me certainly, I needed to reconceptualise the way I was actually teaching politics and treaty. And one of the things that Whae Margaret Mutu said to me that gave me a fright when she talks about her politics class, she goes, oh yes, you know, all the stuff that was said on the marae by Maiko Matua, tapu, mana, rangatiratanga. That's what I teach my students, and about lecture 9, then I say, and then the Pākehā came. lecture 9, people. Usually I know where lots of our classes start, and she said, you know, that we have to know, our students have to know that there is a Māori world, we have our own laws, we have our own ways of doing things. And I know that may sound sad, but certainly my experience of students is that they don't know that. They don't know that. So she said, bury them in that stuff and then let them know about what happened when the Pākehā came. So, part of it also as well, as you'll see from Kokalinda and Papa Graham, was ensuring though that you have that critical thinking and that you have that critical scaffolding around what students are going to learn so that they can better interpret and analyse and deal with what it is, all the material that they then encounter. So for example, Kokalinda said language is really important, especially to deal with those emotions, that giving them a technical word often allows them to speak to something. It might be inequality, it might be ideology, it might be hegemony, but it can be empowering, and it gives them a vocabulary. So that notion of actually having these words as part of whatever you're teaching, and Papa Graham, in fact, was quite grumpy about it and said it should be a part of every single class. People that understanding the marginalisation and how power is used by dominant groups to reproduce their dominant interests. He talked about how that will come in many sites, that will be in Treaty Waitangi settlements, that'll be in schooling, that'll be in health. But if we can teach our students the fundamentals, those building blocks of that approach, and then they can apply it everywhere, because the rest are sites of struggle. And as you can see our quote there from Winona, because being critical is what's going to allow us to see what's actually happening, the wider impacts of things. And so just a final point with regards to praxis is that Moana especially has encouraged us young educators to be committed to exploring, you know, all those unspoken things, all those unspoken corners of our heart that perhaps never come out, and that is how we can achieve a liberation. So he says there are always things that beat away at our wairua, even if we don't know that they're happening. So if we want to change all of that, if we want to change the current reality, then we must do that through treaty hui or whatever, but we can only do it properly if, then he says, the feminists use the term naming the beast, the feminists, and we have to name it and know what it is, and that it's that whole myriad of things from the whispered pain we sometimes don't even know is there. So if you can quantify things, like what's happening now, we will settle this for so many dollars, and it's really easy to talk about those things. They have been settled with money, but he says, but that doesn't address those less tangible, hidden things, and part of what I think has to be done if you're working with our people is to find some way to talk about that, those hidden pains. So, what are we doing with all this information? As said, that's only a tiny part of it, but I can't even begin to explain how much that has transformed my own understanding of my practice as a political educator and amongst our group. And I know that I'm meant to wait to finish writing the PhD before I can share it, but who has the patience for that? Not me. And that moment that the interviewees released their transcripts, promise Leonie, once they had released their transcripts, we've been discussing it as a rōpū, te atukura. We have already started rewriting our courses, we have already started changing our class assessments, but also we're developing resources for ourselves and for other young political educators, and trying to follow the instructions of Leonie to be strategically creative. One of the things that we've done is a spoken word piece. This piece is sort of a little bit refers to what Kokalinda was talking about yesterday, and the other instructions that we've had about that notion of critical understanding, and it's just about that if we relax because we have wharekura and things like that, because we have the reo and tikanga, we can be really happy about that, but if there's not that critical understanding of some of the wider things, just because it may not have been part of the learning or curriculum, then we might be making a mistake. We might be setting ourselves up for things further down the line. So 2 minutes, 45 seconds. All right? Okay. We've got time, supposedly. So this is just our first piece that has come out of that PhD data. It's just called We Will Tell Them. This is a plea to other young political educators about the education of our rangatahi, our youth. We will tell them. Born of greatness, of gods and stargazers, of those who traversed oceans, scientists, strategists, future makers. We tell them this, our youth, that self-confidence is all they need, a positive Māori identity, the magic ingredient for them to succeed, to climb those ivory towers and join that qualified elite. We tell them this with hope in our hearts, praying it's enough, but whānau, what if it's not? Because their te reo may be dope, their haka's game tight, their whakawhanaungatanga on point, wānangas all day needs be all night. And we may let our hearts soar at this new generation, who know the value of who they are, and got the problems we were facing, of no kohanga, no kura, no quality teacher time, no school environments that loved us, or the dynamism of Māori minds. No, the youth of today bear the fruits of many fights, living the dreams dared dreamed by those who fought endlessly for our rights. And we can celebrate these achievements. Yes, as Māori we have come far, but you know what hasn't changed enough? The world we share with Pākehā. You see, as Moana J tells us, it's a culture, this colonisation. Its grip is deep and wide across lands and minds, causing violent suffocation of this new generation and all the promise and potential they hold. And out in this world we share, we see their confusion, anger, sadness unfold. When faced with the racism, faced with the prejudice, faced with the media, social services, police, and faced with those up close in those ivory towers, other students, other lecturers, admin, who when they encounter, do not treat them as sons of Māui, daughters of Hina, descendants of Tāne. And I worry about those moments. I worry about those moments in my heart and in my mind, the crushing of these spirits that we have grown with love and time, and stress as to what can be done. See, we can't be there all the time to rain down our righteous fury, no. Our youth have to be primed, prepped with mental toki to deflect that violence that we know will come with no surprise. So, in their basket with Skak's identity, mad skills and inspiration, there's another small element to add. Matike mai, it's called conscientisation. That in addition to the what, they learn deeply, profoundly why. Why the struggle? Why the oppression? Why the obsession with making us white? Why the aggression against our brown skin, Māori ways, identity rights? And that this is not just history, as they would have you and me believe. It is now our time. You and me. And you must be ready, my loves. Let's get you ready. So, a little Fanon, a little Foucault, a little Gramsci, a little Giroux, a little Freire, but that's an old school start. Davis and Lord may be closer to heart, Baba and Said or Spivak and Shiva, and of course we have our other Indigenous peoples, Honani, Ngugi, Deloria and Grande, and let's not forget the intellects of this land, the Jacksons, Makaides, Smiths and Pihamas, the Pitmans, Mutus, Walkers, Heikokos, those who were and are beside us. Our choices are endless for Māori critical consciousness. And we are descendants of Maui, so it shouldn't surprise us. And following theories, histories of these lands, he whakaputanga into tiriti, the suppression of rebellions, peka peka and parihaka, education acts and land courts, and the mighty resistance fought. Petitions in parliaments, occupations and hikoi movements, and now UN visits, that our ancestors never forgot or stopped for us. So choose we must to ensure when we tell them that they can create our youth a world how they want it, that in their minds they're empowered and ready to strike or to sing, debate, paint, however they choose to fight. The many shades of oppression, system, discourse and dynamic that we know they will face on their path as young adults, that we face today, this political, spiritual annihilation, but can overcome with strategic transformations, and we will tell them, our grandchildren, of our struggles of old, how liberation of our mind was liberation of our souls, and that may sound old, but it felt kind of new, because with each generation coming up, coming through, are new visions to be realised, being realised by you, new dawns, new days, we will tell them. Me hi whakamutunga ki etahi waku kai uiwi ko wihi atu ki tū o te arai, nō reira haere atu rā kōrua, ma matau o kupu taonga tuku iho I pupuri tonu hei taonga, hei oranga, ma matau nō reira kōrua haere atu rā, rātou kia rātou, tātou kia tātou, tēnā tātou katoa.